Yeah. So the topic for today that we are going to do is utilizing Apache Jenkins and Maven capability to build an automated pipeline. So this topic is not like it's not focused primarily on development or something, but it's like an important concept in the software development cycle. So we all, as a developer, uh, we have come across the term CI/CD. So who doesn't hear like don't know about the term CI/CD or what CI/CD is? Anyone? Is it like a new term? Is the term CI/CD new for you, or have you heard it before? I mean, this these term for as a developers, we come across this term CI/CD pretty often in our development cycle. So CI/CD is basically continuous integration and continuous deployment. There's various different terms. Some says like continuous delivery. Some say continuous deployment. But whatever it is, the concept is concept on a high level. It's pretty much same. So why do we need like an automated pipeline, and what are the other methods of doing this? So this presentation, this session is basically focused on creating a pipeline using Jenkins and Maven. But there's like other tools as well from which you can build a pipeline. Like you can have your release pipeline using DevOps. You can use your pipelines using Anypoint's RESTful APIs. So Anypoint has the Cloud App APIs. If you use that to build your pipeline, so there's like various methods. This is primarily focused on Jenkins and Maven. Before diving into Jenkins and Maven, let's look at these two important concepts, which is continuous integration and what is continuous deployment. So continuous integration. So since the domain that we are working on, or the technology that we are working on, it's focused, it's an integration platform basically. So what does that mean? It's like we are not, there's not like a single developer working on one big project. There's like multiple developers working on multiple pieces in the same project. So we'll have multiple developers working and building their code, pushing their code, and all those stuff. Now, in order for the project to work completely as a whole, what we would need is we would need to integrate all those code and make sure that that code works as expected. Initially, before having a continuous integration concept, what used to happen is all the code. Suppose if you are a developer, your code used to get pushed and your code used to get released and tested as a whole once the entire package is built. But with the implementation of continuous integration, what it happens is once you develop your code, once you check in, once you push it, so your code is tested, built, if there's any issue, you get instantly. So it means like your code is getting now isolatedly tested. So you know what are the issues in your code. Did your code break? Where are the failures and all those isolation? It's possible because of continuous integration. Now, continuous deployment, it starts where continuous integration ends. So continuous integration is basically reading your code, taking it, and then running tests and seeing whether it's perfectly right or not, whether the project is building correctly or not. And once it's built correctly, that's when continuous deployment comes into the picture. So continuous deployment, what it does is it takes that package that was built successfully, and it deploys it into various environments, like different environments, whatever environments do you have, and then it's being ready to consume by the end users. And continuous so we have seen various projects or various products we have seen which have this versioning concept. We have like different versions. So where does this versioning come from? So this versioning is basically the version which was deployed. So we see, let's take MuleSoft for example. We see so much versioning in the products. Like every time we see there's like a new version, like 4. to no, like 6.3.6.5.9 or 7.4.4, like the studio versions. So what are these version numbers? So this version numbers is basically uh, the build or the version that was recently deployed. So 7.4.1 was a previous deployment. 7.4.2 is now the recent deployment. So the versioning and everything is based on this integration and the deployment concept. So this in whole, so the big picture, this in whole, what it does, it takes the product, it takes the code, does all the processing and deploys the product in a standard process. So if I go into the definition, like the proper definition of what CI/CD is, so CI/CD in simple words is defined as the best practices for the development team to focus on meeting the business requirements, code quality and security, and the deployment steps are automated. Do you have any questions on what CI/CD is until now? Okay, so we can go into the questions later. So this CI/CD. So why do we need CI/CD? So we know what CI/CD is as a developer. Why? What's CI/CD? What's the concept behind it is, and the tools that are used behind it. But the question should come into our mind is why do we need it? So before answering that, we should think what it was before. Like, what if there's no CI/CD pipeline implemented? What if everything is manual? So what are the drawbacks of that? So if everything is like manual, we'll have like slower software builds. The time to market would be slow. There would be no guarantee on the code like what the quality of the code is, and what are the development practices. So to overcome all those drawbacks, this CI/CD helps us in converting those disadvantages to advantages. So if we have like a good CI/CD pipeline, we'll have like faster software builds, the bug resolution, the code quality, everything is done faster. The consumption of the code is faster. That's why the time to market is increased. Let's for example, if you have any product and you from once the product goes live, we have some bug issues or anything, so the time to resolve as well increases with the help of a CI/CD pipeline. And then the improvements, the code quality, since every code that you develop and check in has to go through the testing process, the build process, and all those process. So we know that the code that we are producing is of a good quality. So there's an improvement in the quality for the code. And then we have efficient developers. Efficient developers in the sense, like suppose if I'm a developer, I check in a code, and then if my code goes to the CI/CD process, so I would know whether my code broke the build or not. If my code broke the build, then I know, yes, the issue is in my code, so I'll fix it and I'll do it to make sure that the package doesn't fail. So in that case, each developer makes sure that the code that they are pushing is is of good quality. In that case, we have like efficient developers. So these are like the top uh, what you can say, the advantages of having a CI/CD pipeline. And overall, in an organization, these are pretty important concepts, and it holds a lot of value. That's why in most of the organizations they have like a good standard CI/CD pipeline for the delivery of the code, and the strict code quality process that the developers have to go through. There's a code review process and all the stuff where you have to go through so that you deliver good code quality to your end user or the consumer. Any questions up to now? Because my main focus for this was not to go into too deep into theory, but to go through a walkthrough on how we can use the capability of Jenkins and Maven to build a CI/CD pipeline. But this is to just give like a high level overview of what CI/CD is and why do we need a pipeline. So if we have no other queries or questions regarding the theory, we could straight away dive into the demo of how to build a small CI/CD, a very simple CI/CD pipeline using the capability of Jenkins and Maven. Are we good to go to the demo? If you have any questions, then just let me know in the chat window. If you're good, then I can go like try dive into the demo. Okay, so no questions yet. So we'll dive into the demo straight away. So before diving into the demo, there is few prerequisites that you need in your system. You need to have Jenkins installed in your system, and installing Jenkins, it's pretty simple. I'll not go into that. It's like a simple step-by-step method to install uh, Apache Jenkins in your system. So before going that, does anybody know what Jenkins is? Like in small words, if someone can type in the chat window if they know like what Jenkins is or what's the use of Jenkins. Yeah, Sunny says yes. Yeah. So could you just type or could you just like in few in like 5 to 6 words, can you let me know what Jenkins is? Yeah, Jenkins is a build automator. Yeah, that's a good explanation for what Jenkins is. Yeah. So Jenkins is an open source tool. So Jenkins is not yeah, for building a pipeline. That's a good answer. Yeah. So Jenkins is an open source tool that's basically used for continuous integration purpose. So it's so Jenkins has its own built-in plugins and everything, and Maven is one of those plugins which Jenkins has, and we use that for we use that plugin of Jenkins to build our pipeline. So Jenkins is a hub where we can actually execute our script, and we can execute Maven scripts and many other scripts inside Jenkins. So first thing that you have to do is have Jenkins installed in your system. So once Jenkins is in your system, so go into the folder where your Jenkins is installed, and just run a small command which is jenkins.exe.start. So this is a very easy command. So go into the folder where your Jenkins is installed. After the Jenkins is installed, just run this command start. So what it will do is it will start your Jenkins, and the default port where Jenkins is installed, Jenkins is hosted is 8080. So if you go into this URL, which is localhost answer HTTP localhost 8080. So if you go here, you can see this is the Jenkins. So once your Jenkins is started, you will see the screen and all your jobs and everything. So once it loads, you could see that. So this is the initial step that you need to do, that the Jenkins is up and running. So now what I'll do is I'll create a very simple a mule project, a very simple mule project. So what we will do in this demo is we'll create a mule project. We'll push the code into a Git repository. We'll use GitHub Git repository. We'll write the script for deploying the code that we just developed in the studio into our Anypoint platform in our Anypoint platform. So it's a very simple code and everything. So I'll just create a new project here. Let's give it the name as webinar CICD demo. Let's give it a 4.2.1 and everything is fine here. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, just put it in the chat window. I'll keep my eye on that. Once it's building the project, what we'll do is in GitHub, we'll create a new Git repository. You can use anything, like it can be a Bitbucket or an Azure DevOps, anything that's your choice. GitHub is because GitHub I like working with GitHub, so yeah, GitHub, and I'll give the same name as webinar demo. And for this webinar purpose, I'll keep this repository as public, and I'll just create this repository. So our project is, so here our repository is also created. So this is our repository and these are the details for repository. So what we'll do initially now is we'll create our application, a very simple application. Let's have an HTTP listener, and let's create a small hello world project. Let's add a log as well. So it's a very basic project. I'll just give the path as test. Given the logger message. This is a test one. And I'll set the payload as hello world so that we can see it in the postman, the response body. It's a simple hello world project. I don't want to make it complicated. So this is a very simple project. So just to check whether this application runs properly or not, let's run this. I hope there's no error in this. Any questions up till now? Yeah, and as I mentioned it before, Jenkins and Maven is not the only method of building your CI/CD pipeline. Jenkins and Maven is one of the most used ones, but now people are more using Azure DevOps as well because they have like inbuilt capability of building the pipelines and release pipelines and all those stuff. So yeah, we can use Azure DevOps as well, and there's Cloud Hub's RESTful APIs that you can use to deploy your applications as well. Yeah, so let me options analyst. Yeah, so I'll clear the logs. So this application deploys. So this should run. Let's just send the request. Yeah, we got a hello world response, and you could see in the logs like this. So this application is running perfectly. Now, so we built this a very simple app. Now my aim is to deploy this app into my anypoint platform using the CI/CD, using Jenkins and Maven's capability. So, so before doing that Jenkins and Maven's capability, we have to add few plugins in our project. We have to add few Jenkins plugins in our project, and obviously since we are deploying it into our anypoint platform, we need to configure somewhere like, okay, yes, deploy my application into anypoint platform. So all those configurations, all those details have to be put inside this pom.xml. Since all Mule4 projects are like now Maven projects, so all projects come with this pom.xml file. So all the details of where you want to deploy it, in which environment, what's your anypoint platform URL, and all those stuff has to be inside this pom.xml. So if you look closely into your pom.xml, you'll see like when you create a project, any project, this Maven plugin is added by default. So this is the code that you get when you create a new project, and you'll see like there's a blank configuration tab, like there's no details inside this configuration tab. And inside this configuration tag, we need to enter our anypoint platform details. So what details do we need inside that? So to save time, I already wrote this down. If I go into this, yeah. So if I go into this configuration tag, so I'll go one by one what we need. So here we are deploying into Cloud Hub. If you have like a standalone or some your server, we can have those details as well. But since we are deploying this application in Cloud Hub, so we'll have our Cloud Hub details here. We'll have, so all those parameters come inside this. This is the URI, so this is fixed. So this is your anypoint URL. This is the version that you want. Since it's a 4.2.1, we'll do 4.2.1. This is your username and password for your platform. Now, this is not at all a good practice to give the username and password in this. Just for this demo purpose, I have done this in this, but this is not at all a good practice to have your username and password. Jenkins has their own built-in potential of storing your credentials. I'll show it once we go into the Jenkins part. So we can give the username and password through Jenkins itself. This is in real project we would never do this. We would give it a property name such as it can have any property name such as this. It can have like any point dot username or something. So it would be a property file. It would never ever be a value that's unencrypted and usually visible. So just for this demo purpose, I've added these values in this configuration. And then the other configuration we need is the application name. What's the name of your application? What's the worker type? What's the environment you want to deploy to? What's the region and all the stuff. You can even add the worker instead of again with worker type, you can add details like what are the worker size you need. So there's various configuration that you can add under this. And this is your configuration. So this is the first part that you do. So this is pretty straightforward. And then there are 3 plugins that we need to add in our project, 3 Maven plugins that we, additional Jenkins plugin that we need in our project. And those plugin is, so if we go into this plugin, yeah. So the plugins that we need is the Maven deploy plugin, the Maven jar plugin, and the Maven war plugin. So these are the 3 additional plugins that we need in order for our project to get deployed into platform using Jenkins and Maven. Is it clear until now, or am I going too fast? Like I can go slow if you need. Am I going too fast? Do you want me? Do you want me to go through some part? Okay, so someone is a webinar recorded and available. Yes, the webinar is being recorded and it will be available for later reference. Yes. How does the use of Maven's Cloud Hub deploy plugin compare to the Anypoint CLI? Yeah, I'll go through that point later. And that's a good question. Okay, so if okay, so the 3 plugins that we need is, so when you create a new project, the only plugin that we get by default is the Mule Maven plugin. But for our CI/CD pipeline to uh, we need additional 3 plugins. One is this Maven deploy plugin, and this one is deploy plugin is used for the deployment, and then Maven jar plugin is for the packaging. So this is the second plugin that we need, and the third plugin that we need is the Maven war plugin. So these 3 additional plugins are required. So these plugins are actually required by Jenkins so that it can utilize read from the POM and use it for running the Maven scripts under the using the Maven plugin. So these are the additional plugins that the script requires. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. So this is the background work that you need into your Mule project. When you want to deploy your project using Jenkins and Maven, just give the configuration details and add this 3 plugins, and that should do it for you. And yeah, that's it. Yeah. So now once our development is done, so this is the very first phase. If you're a developer, it's like developing your code. So once you developed your code and you check locally everything is working fine, and let me just stop this application. Yeah. So once you see that everything is working fine locally, so now what I want to do is I want to check in my code into our Git repo. So we created our Git repository here. This is our Git repository, and we didn't check any code here. So what we'll do is we'll go into our project folder and we'll just check in our code. One sec. Go to here and open my properties here. I'll just initialize the Git here. I'll do Git init, and I'll add my origin. So these are the common Git steps uh, that we do. Add your origin, just check your Git status. So none of your files have been added. Now to add all your files into your, to stage all your files, just do git add -a. It'll stage all your files. And once you stage it, just commit it. First commit, just commit it. So once you commit it, next step is pushing it. What I'll do is I'll just push my code. It'll ask for my password. Yeah. So now my code from my local machine, I committed it and I posted into this repository. So if I go into this repository now, I could see that my code is now in my GitHub repository. So now I did the first part of my job is like developing my code and pushing it into a Git repository. Now what I'll do is now I'll create my pipeline. Are we good till now or am I going too fast? Good. So no questions here. Yeah. Okay, so now the second part is to build to actually build a pipeline. So what I'll do is I'll go into Jenkins. So Jenkins, the UI is pretty simple. So what the first thing when you install your Jenkins for the first time, what you have to do is you have to configure few plugins. So what you have to do is you have to go into Manage Jenkins, and here, if you go into your configure system, yeah. So there's like few plugins that you can add here. So there's this Git plugin, and yeah, here's the Git plugin that you can have, and there's a Maven plugin as well. Notification, one sec. Yeah, global tool configuration. So if you go into the global tool configuration here, you can. So here's the Git. So this is the Git that I've already configured. The Git path of yours. It can be. You can also install it automatically through an online link, so you can do that as well. And then you can add Gradle, you can have Ant, or you can have Maven, and you can add Docker. So there's various plugin that you can add, but for our this thing we'll only need Git here, and Maven plugin comes by default in this. So if not, you can add a Maven plugin as well. But yeah, this is the global tool configuration area, where you actually use where you configure all your plugins. And the other place that you need to go is this credentials. So I was talking to you about how to not give your endpoint credentials directly into your uh, this thing directly into your code. So what you can do is you can go into this credentials section and you can add your credentials under this tab. So for my previous project I already added my credentials here. So you can add your credentials here. What's your username, what's your password, and what's your ID. So this ID is important because I'll use this ID to get my username and password. So suppose if the ID is anypoint.credential, so to retrieve the username, I'll do anypoint.credential.username. To retrieve the password, I'll do anypoint.credential.password. Now, since the scope of this is global, what I can do in my code is instead of having my username and password directly here like this uh, text, I can could do it like anypoint.credential.username or anypoint.credential.password, and the Jenkins is smart enough to know like it's reading a credential from its this thing, and it'll take the values that are present here. So that's one of the good practice of giving the credentials. instead of directly giving it into the code. So these are the few steps that you can do before creating your pipeline. So once all these are like properly configured, what we can do is we can create a new pipeline. So just go into a new, give a name, like I'll give the same name, and I'll do pipeline. Yeah. So once you go into this pipeline, so it's even configuration of this pipeline is pretty simple. So this is like one. So the main part where you'll write your script is this pipeline section, and once you can see here in the pipeline script, you get like a blank screen. But Jenkins provides us with a very cute code here, a pre-built code here. So if you just do like GitHub plus Maven, it'll generate this code for you, and it gives you a good skeleton of the script. So this is the deploy. This is our Maven script that we'll be using for our deployment process. So it actually generates a skeleton for us. So these are the various stages: preparation, stage build, stage results. You can even add a stage test where you can do a Maven test. You can do a stage deploy where you can do a Maven deploy. So you can add your own stages. You can do all the stuff. But this, if you go into Jenkins and if you do this GitHub plus Maven, you get this cute script here, and it's easily usable. So I've already written down the code, the script that we'll be needing here. So what's the first stage? The first stage is preparation. So preparation. So in the first stage, what I'll do is the first step in any CI/CD pipeline is to retrieve the code from your Git repository. Now, since our Git repository link is this, I'll do is I'll update my Git repository link here. The first step, what I'm telling my pipeline to do is to get this code. So what it'll do is in this get step, it'll get the code from my repository. Now, since this is it's a public repository, you won't be requiring any credentials in that. But suppose if it was a private repository, then you could have used like using credentials and then passing the credentials under this. So you could do that, but since it's a public repository, I've used public repository for this demo, so I won't be needing any username, password, or any credentials to retrieve the code from my GitHub. So this is the first step of the pipeline, is to retrieve the code from this. And then what I'll do is I'll run a normal build stage where I'll do a Maven clean package cycle. So it's a normal clean package just to check whether it's properly packaged or not, whether it's building properly or not. Also, if there's any issue, I'll come straight away here, and it'll tell me like, oh, it failed to build. Once it's built successfully, once my project is only when my jar is generated, what I'll do is I'll deploy that jar to my Maven, to my Anypoint platform. Now, when I run this mule deploy, so that's why we need this plugin. That's why we need this additional plugin, which is the Maven deploy plugin. So it'll straight away read the configurations that's defined here in the Cloud Hub deployment, and it'll read all this configuration, and it deploy to the Anypoint platform. So all this reading of this configuration and deployment would be done in this step. Similarly, you can have another step before deployment. It can be a Maven test one, where suppose if you have M units in your code, and if you want to run uh, your M units before deployment, just to check whether your unit testing is done perfectly or not. So in that case, you can have a testing as well. In our example here, we don't have any M units, so I'll just skip the testing part. So I have like a very simple script where it just takes a Git, builds it, and deploy it into the Anypoint platform. So once this is done, what I'll do is I'll save it, and let's build it now. So what I'll just do this build now. Once your pipeline is ready, so it will build. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, or am I going too fast, you want me to go too slow, just let me know. And you can see in the console output what's happening here. So we see here like the build is successful. It means like the Maven build was successful. Now what it'll do, it'll start doing our mule deploy. So it will start deploying our this application, this webinar CI/CD demo. We gave the application name as CI/CD webinar demo. So this is the application name that would be deployed in our Anypoint platform, and the environment that I've given is sandbox. So since it's I'm using like a trial account for this demo, so you can have environment like dev, QA. You can define all those environment, but in this it will be deployed in the sandbox environment. Let's just go through there. So you can see here it says creating application CI/CD webinar demo. So if I go into my sandbox environment, yeah, it's deploying. Yeah, I can see it in the logs. Yeah. So I can see it in the logs that it already created this application and it's trying to deploy it. So it's the process is entirely now, you can say, handled by the Jenkins pipeline. There's no manual, nothing. Uh, the pipeline script takes it, it builds the code, it'll run your test and it'll deploy it. You can see your application is started and you can see this green uh, that the application is running. So what I'll do is I'll just run a small query to check whether my application is working or not. So this is a deployment URL. I'll copy this. If I already have this here, yeah, it's the same URL. I'll just send the request to check whether my application is running fine or not. See, I got the hello world response as well, and in my logs, if I go, I added a logger. So yeah, see, this is a test. So I see it in the so this is a test run. So I see it in the log. So it means like my application is uh, read from my GitHub and deployed, and now it's running in my Anypoint platform. Now if you want to completely automate it, like I don't want to do, or I don't want to go into my Jenkins and I don't want to click the build now and all this thing. What if I just want to like if someone checks in a code, I want the build process to trigger straight away. So even to do that, we can add a polling in our script. So here you can see the build triggers. So you can have a polling mechanism in your script. So for this thing, I'll do the polling mechanism like let it run every 1 minute. One slash. What is that? The conjure. Hmm. Yeah, so this is a cron job for running it every 1 minute. Usually what we have is, so this polling, what it does is, so this poller will continuously like check in your GitHub repository. And so this can be specific to a branch as well or to an entire repository as well. Usually we have it as per one branch. So what it will do, it will poll your GitHub repository and check if someone has committed any code or not. Having it check every 1 minute is not a good practice. Usually you do it like every 1 hour or maybe at a specific at a specific time of the day. But for this demo, we'll do it like for it to check every 1 minute. So it'll every time it'll do a git check into our GitHub repository to check if someone has committed a code or not. And if it sees like a new commit, it'll straight away take the code, build it, and deploy it. So check whether let's check how this works. So I added a polling scheme where it will check the Git repository every 1 minute. So let's do and change something in our code. I'll hello world. Uh, add another string. This is been a test, some random string. So yeah. So I updated. I added a string into the response payload. And now if I do a git push, if I do a git status, if I do a git status, I would see like, oh my, this file has some changes. So I'll just commit the changes. Yeah. So once I push the code, I'll go into my Git repo and I'll check that I should have two commits now in my repository. See, I see two commits, so there has been a commit. So now you see like it I didn't even click the build now, but since it's checking every 1 minute, it sees like a new commit has occurred. Yeah, it checks like the commit. It even gives you what's the commit and the commit message. So it says like, okay, there has been one commit within the poll check, and who did the commit number, and what was the commit message. So it reads all of that, and the entire code would again go through the same process, and you could check in the logs. Yeah. Meanwhile, any questions? Yeah. What is the other way without defining anything on POM? So you can have Jenkins scripts. You can have in Jenkins file script. So one another method of creating a pipeline. And okay, one second. Let me go back to project. So if I go into the configure, let me take a new example. One second. Yeah, test two. Yeah. So instead of having pipeline script from here itself, what you can do is you can have the script actually not written here, but it can be present in a file which is Jenkins file that can be present in any source control or within your project as well. So instead of actually displaying the script itself, you can give where your Jenkins file script actually resides in your project. So here you give the repository URL of your Git repository, and you can give the credentials that you want to use, the branch that you are actually listening to, and here is the script part. So every project, so in the project you can have a Jenkins, you'll have a Jenkins file which will have the exact same script that you saw that was written in our this thing. So instead of actually displaying it in that, you can have it in the Jenkins file. Both have their own advantages, but yeah, because in Jenkins, if you have it in the inline box, it's easily editable and you can view it. In case of Jenkins file, you have to go into your project and edit it. And the advantage of having a Jenkins file is for multiple pipelines, you can have the same script. You can have your script like your script can be a different project in itself, and every build pipeline would read the same Jenkins script for the projects. So you can have that as well. So that's one of the advantage of that, of having a Jenkins file that you can share the script among multiple projects. But yeah, you can even use it in a Jenkins file instead of directly using it uh, in the script in the box. Yeah, there's a question, which is better approach, using script in Python or Jenkins file in code? Both have their own advantages, but I would still, if you're working on a code, like on a code on a big space or something, in that case, having your Jenkins script in a file is actually a good approach, because in that case, you can actually share your scripts among multiple projects and you don't have to build scripts like individual scripts for individual projects. Recommendations for GitHub: do you build whole repos or single apps? So what's so there's so it's not one answer for that. I've seen projects in which they have multiple APIs, multiple applications in one repository, and there have been cases where there is one repository per application. I would, on my view, I like having one repository per application. In that case, your build pipeline and your process of deploying your application is pretty simple, straightforward, and you can manage your applications pretty well. If you have all your applications or most of multiple applications in one repository, that sometimes can create a problem. Like if there's an issue with one application, the entire repository may not get built in that case. So there's do's and don'ts, and there's no specific best practices stated as somewhere. You can see people having this norm of not utilizing more repos. So what they do is they create one repositories, and then they create folders under this repository having different files, having different applications, which makes the repository bulky and difficult to manage in some case. But on my opinion, I would prefer having one application per repository. How to pass parameters, say dev or prod, based on which we can deploy into Cloud Hub. Yeah, so I was going through, I would have gone through that point. Yeah. So there's this concept which is known as profiles. So in this, we have, so let's just check whether it was deployed perfectly or not. So it's deployed, and let's just run and check whether the updated version got deployed or not. Is it still deploying? Oh, did not see it. Let's check. No, well, this is not. This is interesting. Okay, so it got deployed at 9:52. I don't see in the logs. It's somehow listening to this now. There. Yeah, we can take into that later. Yeah. So the question was asked, like, how do we do it? Deploy for like different environments that we have. So we what in pom.xml, what we can do is we can define profiles. So here's an example of what a profile is. So each environment will have its own profile. So there would be a different profile for dev, one for QA. For it depends on how many environments do you have. So if you have suppose only dev, QA, and prod, so you can define 3 profiles. And in this profiles, each profile would have its own properties. So in that case, it will have, you can define the environment what would be the application name in that environment, and what workers as and all those stuff. And then in the Cloud Hub, in this configuration, the Cloud Hub deployment, instead of having an application name here, like having this value, what you'll have is you'll have a property name, which is application dot name, and it would actually take that value from your profile. Like you can have properties like application name, and it will take it from your profile. Now to tell Mule to use which profile, what happened is in the Maven command. So we use this command, which is Maven deploy. It's -d mule deploy. Something. Yeah. So in that case, we can have an additional parameter which is -p. So minus this p defines which profile to use. So for example, you're running it into your dev script. So you should give your profile ID here. So here for dev, my profile ID is dev. So if I run this script, dev, so now when my script runs, it will go into the Cloud Hub configurations, and it will take all the configurations which are under the dev profile. For my script, which is in QA, I'll do -p QA, and it will take all the profiles from QA. So in this way, you can create profiles under pom.xml, and you can pass in different configuration properties for different environments. Yeah. So how would Jenkins know that the deployment was successful? So if you go into the logs, so if you go into any build, so here if you go into this build, and if you go into the console output here, and in the end you'll see it checks like deployment. It deploys that, and it just checks whether it's existing redeploying, and it starts, and then it checks if it has started. If it has started, in the sense if it's green or not, like if it's successfully deployed or not. If it's not successfully deployed, if it's red, in that case Jenkins would know, and it would just give you like a build failure. It would only give you build success if it gets a response from endpoint platform that it was built successfully. Your code may have implementation errors, like it can have implementation errors, but your jar was built and deployed successfully. Like there wasn't any deployment error or issue or anything. It can have implementation issues, but there's no deployment issues for your application. So yes, so from this status, it actually gets to know whether it was deployed successfully or not. Yeah, this is done. Yeah, I had this much only for the demo. Yeah, yeah. For building your pipeline using CI/CD, you can try creating your own simple CI/CD pipeline, and using Jenkins and Maven. It's creating a small pipeline, and then once you create this small pipeline, you can build on top of that how to use it in a private repository, how to pass on the credentials using this credentials tab and all those stuff. And using this way, you can actually automate your complete CI/CD process for your organization. Anything you want to talk about? Anything else? Oh, any point CLI. Right? Yeah. So AnyPoint has this command line interface. I haven't used it in a project or anything, so I haven't worked on that as such. But in AnyPoint CLI, they have their own CLI tool which you can download, and you can work on. You can do it on, and it's they have their own RESTful API calls that you can make to deploy the application. So what you have to do is you have to go into your project, and go into the base this thing on your project, and you have to run your AnyPoint CLI through here. And what you have to do is you have to just execute few commands, and using the AnyPoints, using the cloud runtime manages RESTful APIs, and in that case, you can deploy application. I haven't used or utilized Anypoint CLI in particular as such. Maybe we can have a demo for that in our next webinar. Any other questions or such? We can cover any CLI in our next webinar for sure. That's like a broader concept in itself. Anyone else? Any questions or anything that they want to discuss? If not, then we can end this webinar. I didn't get the question. What does that from BB how to Rabbit? Can you elaborate on that question? How to run the okay? So okay, how to run the pipeline from Bitbucket? Yeah, if you go into Bitbucket, so one second, let me go into Bitbucket. I don't have a demo Bitbucket account as such, but yeah, in Bitbucket, there's actually a separate tool that is pipeline, and you can actually build your pipelines through Bitbucket in itself. One second, let me log in. Let me just check if I have a demo account to show it. Nope, I don't have a demo account for it to show in the Bitbucket. No, Bitbucket can have its own pipeline in itself. It's same as Azure DevOps. They have their own different section of building pipelines in their case. You can use Jenkins in there, but you can actually have your own scripting in the Maven scripting in there to actually run your pipelines. And the language that Maven script uses, so it's basically, so Maven is a tool that basically uses Java, but you can write the scripts in JS as well if you know JavaScript. But yeah, the main language that you can use is, so you can write the script in Java as well, the scripting language in Maven, and it would actually work. I've seen people running script in Java and JS, so yeah. So this webinar was primarily focused on Jenkins and Maven. If we go into Anypoint CLI, and like if we had more time, I would have prepared a good demo for Anypoint CLI as well, like Anypoint CLI or through Bitbucket. Since CI/CD is a very broad concept, and there's so many tools available for actually building your pipelines, and there's an additional concept of having artifactories, like using JFrogs or Maven artifactories. So like the CI/CD, if you want to cover CI/CD in a whole, it will take a lot of time and to do a demo in that case. So the thing that I go through is, like, if we go into theory, going through theory is good, but you don't get that perspective as we get through a live demo of how the end-to-end process works. So that's why I wanted to show, like, how, even like, it's a very simple demo on how CI/CD pipeline actually works using Jenkins, and maybe we can have a future session with Anypoint CLI or with Azure DevOps for the same if you need, and we could go through the different CI/CD processes. Uh, yes, you can get the recording of this demo. I'll save the recordings and I'll share it with the attendees. Thanks, and thank you guys for attending this session. It was a good session with pretty good questions. And yeah, sure, we can have an Anypoint CLI in the future. We can surely have a session on Anypoint CLI, and that's we could cover good concepts in that as well. Just let me know. Do you need like a theoretical or a proper demo like this one? We can have a demo, and uh, instead of going like only theory, if you need a demo, we can have like a 45 minutes or an hour session just to go an end to end using an Anypoint CLI, and we could cover similarly. I think so. We are over time. We are like we are like 20 minutes over time. So if you don't have any questions or anything, then we can end the session here, and we can follow up later, and we will have, if you need more sessions on CI/CD and various CI/CD concepts, we can have a session in the future to go through various demos. Thank you.